afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much to Esther for opening up her home again to us to host today's class. Today's class is the Refuah Shalema of Abraham ben Latife and the Ilui Nishmat Virginia Bat Rivka Aleha Hashalom Berachot and Divrei Torah accordingly. And of course, we have in mind any other people that may need Refuah Shalema or any other type of assistance and should see Yeshuot for all of Bnei Israel. We're just a few days away from the holiday of Hanukkah, a time of miracles, a time of salvation for the Jewish people, which we should all hopefully experience in the days to come. Okay, so I was reminiscing for myself, reflecting a little bit on an incident that had happened to me this past Passover that I probably told, but I'll share again and try to connect it to the topic that we have for today. So I don't typically go away for Pesach, like it's not something that I was, grew up with. But my in-laws go away a lot of times for Florida, and so this past Pesach, we decided, my wife and I, were going to go for the second half of the holiday. We're going to take the family to Florida and just have like a nice, relaxing vacation. And on the second day that I was there, my mom's sister, my aunt, passed away suddenly, and she wasn't so healthy, but she was very young. And I just remember going into the Safra synagogue to go ahead and pray down in Turnberry, and my phone, buzzed once, and I saw it was my dad. And so I didn't answer. I was in the middle of the tefillah. Usually he gets the hint, but then I saw it a second time, and then I saw it a third time. And when I saw it a third time, I said, okay, this is not usual for my father. I stepped out of the minyan, and I saw that he had said that my aunt had passed away, and she lived in Florida. She wasn't married. She didn't have any children. He said, I need you to go and to try and help the situation. We're all the way back in New York. Can you go ahead and be there for assistance? I happen to be a Kohen, so there's not, I can't do everything, but at least having a family member down there was very important. We were able to take care of documentation and collect belongings. And I think it was just a very big relief for my parents and my aunt and uncle to have somebody who was family down there at the time that it happened, because other than that, there was no other family members that were there. And I say all this because I often think to myself, what would have happened if I wasn't there at the time? Because really, that was certainly not in the cards or in the plans, at least not my vacation plans for the Passover holiday. But it was very serendipitous, very fortunate that I was, right? And so it gets you thinking sometimes about how HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a way of sort of orchestrating the pieces of the puzzle. And when you reflect back on it and you really pay attention to it, you see, wow, how was it that I was there at that time to be able to help that situation? What would it have been like if I wasn't there? And how much did HaKadosh Baruch Hu, play a role in the decision-making process that I had, whether to take the vacation to Florida or not, right? So it's hard for us. It's pretty overwhelming to think in those grand terms, like what was going on in the heavens and what was Hashem putting together. And once you start thinking like that, it just becomes so monumental and so overwhelming. Of course, we as human beings have free will and we make our decisions, but once we do, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has just a way of connecting the dots that sometimes is so amazing and so unbelievable that it happens to us on such a small level, thinking about how it happens to so many people. It just you become overwhelmed with feelings of humility, how small you are, but also feelings of love and appreciation for Hashem, that he has a way of orchestrating the situation so that everybody gets exactly what they need, everybody gets what they deserve in a positive way. And that was just something that was resonating with me, that I could be at that time something of a messenger for HaKadosh Baruch Hu in helping to go ahead and connect the dots. And I don't say that in like an arrogant way, oh, I was the messenger of God, so I'm so great. But that I was there at that time to play a small role that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted me to play at that time is a very overwhelming feeling and a very exciting feeling. And I think all of us feel that type of way at certain points. Maybe we don't feel it in the moment when we're doing it because we're preoccupied with whatever the task is at hand that we have to get done. But certainly when we reflect on the situations that we find ourselves in, we think to ourselves, wow, why was it that I was even there? How could it be that I was there on that particular point? And what would have happened if I wasn't? are, overwhelming thoughts that we have, and we feel gratitude and appreciation to Hashem for the way in which He brings everything together for us to come out successful and thriving. And that's something that I think we find in this week's parasha, and in last week's parasha, and in next week's parasha. This series of 3 parashiyot, we find something very interesting about what it means to be a messenger of Hashem, a malach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In this week's parasha, Vayeshev, we read about the unfortunate story of the sale of Yosef. Yosef and his brothers are not getting along. There's a lot of strife within the household, sibling rivalry. Yosef is, talking about his dreams and the grandeur that he sees himself having in the future. He gets favored by his father, and the brothers are not happy about it. And one day, Yaakov Avinu says to Yosef, and he's in charge of overseeing the work of the brothers, go and go check up on your brothers. They took the flock to Shechem. Go see what they're up to. Go check in on them. And the Torah records a few pisukim, a few verses here that seem to be very mundane. What are they doing here? What's the point? The Torah doesn't record stories and altercations like this for no reason. The pasuk says that Yaakov sent him to Shechem, and vayimtza'ehu ish, a man happens to find Yosef, and Yosef is wandering in the field. He's lost his way. He's looking around. He's trying to find his brothers. He can't seem to find them. He looks lost. And this man comes up to him and tells him, what are you looking for? I can tell that you're lost. You're seeking something. And Yosef responds to them, I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they're shepherding, where the flock is? And the man says, they're not here. I saw them, move on from this place. They were here at one point, but they went somewhere else. They went to a place called Dotan, and you should go and find them in Dotan. And Yosef goes to Dotan. And that's where Yosef meets up with his brothers. And that's where they plot to kill him and to throw him into the pit and eventually sell him. What is the point of these pisukim? Why is the Torah recording to us this back and forth between Yosef and a mysterious individual, an unnamed man, unidentified person, about he's lost and he can't find him and he points him in that direction? It all seems to be very unimportant, right? Insignificant. I'm sure there were other stories like this that occurred somewhere during the course of the Torah, and the Torah said it's irrelevant. We're not going to include it. Why does the Torah make a point of mentioning this back and forth between Yosef and this unidentified man about trying to find the location of his brothers? Exactly, right? Exactly. It goes to show you, and this is where the rabbis come in, and the rabbis say, it's an ish, it's an unidentified man. Who do the rabbis say? It was an angel of Hashem. It was Gavriel, who was an angel. Other rabbis take a little bit of a different approach. Ibn Ezra says, no, it was just a random traveler that happened to be. Ramban goes in a different direction. They argue, was it a real angel, so to speak, or just a different person that happened to have been in that situation? Something of that nature. The rabbis kind of debate it back and forth. But I think that's the whole point, right? Because we might call the person an angel of God, but he could also have been a regular person. But who's to say that the regular person in that situation wasn't also the messenger of God? Essentially, an angel is just that, somebody who's been sent by God to perform a task. And who's to say that the average person who was there, who took time, by the way, to notice that Yosef was lost, approach Yosef and say to him, what's going on? Tell me what you're looking for. And then point Yosef in the right direction, ends up being the catalyst for all of the different events that are going to happen from that point on. And you sort of think to yourself, what would have happened had this person not done and pointed Yosef in that direction? I'm sure God would have found a different way, perhaps, but the fact that it happened through him is something that the Torah wants to record to us and wants to tell us. That this person, although unidentified, is an extension of God and began the process of all of these different events unfolding that led to Yosef in Egypt, that led to the Jewish people having to go down to Egypt, and Yosef taking care of the family, and then the slavery, and et cetera, et cetera. It all happens here in one little click, a very unassuming event that most people would just gloss over and not pay attention to and think that wasn't even worth recording. the Torah records it to tell us that very, very exact point, that this person was an extension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He was there at that moment for a reason, and he did his job by pointing Yosef into that direction to help fulfill the plan that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had for the events that were about to come, right? And so, whether he's a real angel, so to speak, or not, it's all really essentially the same when you think about it and you really put it together. And we have similar stories in the previous parasha and in the next parasha, where we talk about an unidentified person, an Ish. In last week's parasha, Yaakov Avinu was in the dead of night moving his family from point A to point B, and he comes across an unidentified man, an Ish, whom he struggles with and he fights. And this changes Yaakov Avinu's entire fortune. He gets a new name, he becomes a different person, he gains the courage and the strength to meet up with his brother Esav and to try and reconcile with him and move forward with his family. Again, an unidentified man, whom the rabbis tell us was an angel of God, the angel of Esav. But the idea is that these encounters happen, and they're momentous occasions in our lives where people around us do things to us, or we serve as those people to trigger a whole chain of events that goes on that we don't sometimes even see the ramifications of them, where exactly they lead to, where it is that we go. Maybe we find out about it later on and we can reflect on it. Maybe we know about it in the moment. Maybe we won't find out about it until our lives are finished and we're able to look back and God shows us what the impact went ahead was. Who knows when we go to Gan Eden after 120 and HaKadosh Baruch Hu shows us, you remember that you did this particular action? Remember you gave tzedakah to the yeshiva? Well, that tzedakah went to pay for this child to stay in school. And this child ended up learning this fact. And this child ended up growing up to be this person. And all of the people they affected. And look at the ripple effect. Look at the snowball that grew as a result of one simple thing that you had the opportunity to do. And you took advantage of it at that moment. It was very unassuming. You probably didn't think much about it after you went ahead and did it. But look at the ripple effect that it went ahead and had. That's being an Ish, being a person who in the moment might be unidentified, but you were put there for a very specific role. You were placed there at that spot by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to make a critical decision and to do something. And we have to do it. It's our job to make that act at that time. The individual in the story had to go and find Yosef and ask him the question and point him in that direction. There's an activity that he has to do there, but you're in that spot to now say, if I achieve my destiny, if I do the right thing at that moment, what could the effects of it be? What could the long-term ramifications have out? Our minds can't even contemplate it. They're beyond human fathom to understand how each little action that we do impacts the future. In next week's parasha, we're going to have a similar event where the brothers are going to find their way down to Egypt, and they're going to stand in front of who appears to them as an unidentified king. Unbeknownst to them, it's Yosef, but they always refer to Yosef as Ha'ish, the man. This unidentified guy is telling us what's going on. And eventually, when when Yosef reveals himself to the brothers, their jaw drops. You mean this was our brother the whole time? And look what he was doing for us the entire time and what he brought us to the entire time? It looked like an unidentified person, a random guy who just happened to be the one who we were communicating with. But it turns out he was our brother. It turns out he launched a chain of events that are going to change not only ourselves as individuals, but our entire nation and its history. So the stories that are going on over here are showing us, and the theme of the unidentified man, that random Ish that comes about, tells us about how God orchestrates the world and how each and every one of us has to find that place that we say, wow, God put me here, whether it's in my family, my community, with this friend group, with on vacation over here, wherever it is that we go, whatever circles we find ourselves in, how we process and say, wait a minute, Hashem put me here for a reason. I could be an unidentified person in someone else's life that launches an entire cascade of events that changes the course of themselves, their family, and I'll find out about it if I do the right thing, if I do what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants for me to be able to do. We don't always know what that is. But being mindful of that possibility makes sure that we say, every action that I do is not random. Every action that I perform, every behavior, everything I do could have long-lasting consequences in the lives of all of the people around me, and especially in my life as well. I don't know what the life was like for this unidentified person moving forward. If it was the angel of God, then he did his shlichut, and who knows what it is afterwards. But when you are that unidentified person, what happens to you and what happens to everyone else, that's something that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will show us when it's all said and done. But in the moment, if you feel that obligation, that sense of I'm here for a reason, I have something to offer, God has put me here to impact others, then it changes the way we think about our behaviors. It makes us hesitate before we say something, do something, to make sure that we have that positive impact on other people. I'm sure all of us can think about different stories or different events that have happened in our lives that it was crazy that I found myself there. It was impossible. The odds of me being in that spot at exactly that time to be able to do that exact thing seems astronomical. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose me at that moment to be that malach, to be that angel, to impact that person. And if I step up to the plate and I do what I'm supposed to do, the course of history in that person's life and in my life are forever changed. And the ripple effect is ongoing and everlasting. Who knows how many generations later on. It's an overwhelming thought. It could be a little bit daunting. Maybe even we feel our shoulders getting a little heavy if we're always thinking like that. But the more we make that type of thinking habitual for us, instinctual, I think the more powerful each and every day becomes for us, how more meaningful each and every experience and every encounter can be for us. Because then we realize there's nothing that's just random, nothing that is haphazard. No interaction as casual as, hey, what are you looking for? You look lost. Yeah, I'm looking for this. Oh, you could find it over there. That was what Yosef and this man had as an interaction. How many times a day do we have those types of interactions? Somebody pulls over, asks us for directions. Can you help me find in the supermarket where this thing is? Most of us don't pay any attention to those types of things. We could think nothing of them. We think they're mundane, they're meaningless. But this certainly was not meaningless, because if the character does something with that, if the effects of it are life changing for them or for you, which many times it is, a simple random conversation like that could make all of the difference in somebody's world. And it's I don't know how far that reach could potentially be. I don't know if anybody has any ideas or so. Yeah, go ahead.
Actually found out I told Dan where to find his brother, and now dead.
Right.
Like he was the messenger of God clearly.
Right.
Now in retrospect, now this person who seemingly thought I said just where to find someone, and now he has that responsibility.
Right.
This man is now dead at my hands. So really,
But it turned out the way it was supposed. Right. Yes.
it's like a crazy thing.
Yes. Yeah. The idea that a person could be responsible in such a small interaction, but then it makes you think about everything that you do a little bit more, making sure that my actions are just not whatever comes to me, whatever is instinctual, that I'm mindful in the moment and present in every single thing that happens, because every small interaction could make a huge difference in someone else's life and in my life as well. And so that's the way I think we want to live. It can feel that's a heavy responsibility to carry, but if not that, then basically we're just kind of coasting along, right? And I don't think that's what we want to feel either. It's interesting that this idea comes up in Pirke Avot as well. It's a very, very powerful line that Hillel HaZaken says. Hillel HaZaken says, "B'makom she'en anashim, hishtadel lihiyot ish." In a place where there are no, I'm literally going to translate anashim to mean men, but I have a better explanation here. In a place where there are no worthy people, hishtadel lihiyot ish, strive to be worthy, right? When you're looking around at your surroundings and you see that people are not doing the right things, they're not speaking the right way, or they're not stepping up to the plate when there's a need that is clearly there, and no one wants to fill that role for whatever reason. They're afraid, they're scared, they might take on some public pressure, It might require them a lot of time and effort. Maybe they even have to put their own finances on the line or themselves on the line. They have to put themselves in the line of fire. These could be all different reasons why people shrink in the moment to not fill a void that is around them. And I'm not necessarily talking about, I'd say you could do this on a bigger level, a community void. The school needs a new PTA president, or somebody needs a new committee member, or something that's like really big. Or you could say, someone in my friend circle, we need someone to handle the birthdays for everybody, organize people's birthday gifts just to make everybody feel. And some people don't want to do that. I don't want to hassle and collect the money and then send it out to people and then they get what they wanted and whatever it is. So there's all different reasons why people don't step up to fill roles that need to be filled, whether in your small friend circle, whether in a family, or potentially in something bigger that affects the community or the world at large, right? There's all different reasons why people, but when you see that need and you feel like, wait a minute, God has put me in a position where I check off all the boxes, where I can make an impact, where I could step into that arena and using the talents and the gifts and the resources that Hashem has blessed me and my family to be able to have, I can make a difference. And it will require sacrifice on my part. It will require my time, my energy, my finances, maybe for me to sacrifice a little bit of my family time or whatnot, but for the greater good of the community, for the greater good of the people around me. And you do in fact step into that circle, you're fulfilling your responsibility. You're fulfilling that moment when you could be the malach of Hashem. You're stepping into that role as the unidentified person, not for the fanfare that you want, not for the public accolades and the acclaims, because if that's what you're doing it for, the Torah makes it very clear that that's not going to work. Note that the people who step into these roles, they're unidentified. They're an ish. They get recorded forever as somebody who does something, but they're not going to get their name, so to speak. Isn't that interesting that in all these cases, there's not a name drawn to that person? We don't even know who they are. We need the rabbis to come and fill it in, or it's an angel, which is a concept that we have a hard time even grasping. Stepping into that role is not because you're going to get the credit for it. It's not because they're going to prop you up. In fact, it's probably a thankless job that's going to get a lot of criticism and it's going to have a lot of heartache that comes with it. But somewhere down the road, years later, decades, who knows how long later, they will record you in a book like this, and people will look at these what appeared at the time as meaningless interactions and say, if that person didn't do that, if they didn't step in, if they didn't approach, if they didn't occupy that spot, where would we be? What would have happened?
That you approached him and asked him, because if anyone just comes over and says, hey, we're so-and-so, and you go over there, you're really not thinking of the long term. It kind of doesn't matter.
Right. Is it somebody approaching you, or is it you? Well, that is something interesting that comes about, because the pasuk says, "Vayimtsaehu ish," the man found him, right? So it almost seems like, right, and that's something that he inserted himself into the story. He found him. It's almost as if the person had this radar detector looking around for people who might need assistance, who might need someone to help point them in the right direction. Maybe that was his job. I don't know. Right. So I think it could happen in both ways, right? I think it could happen in both ways. Definitely in this context, it seems that the person is going out of his way to look for an opportunity to make a difference for somebody in a way that might not seem to be such a big deal, but becomes a very big deal. Sometimes the event will find you, though. Sometimes you won't know it until it crosses your doorstep, and you have a critical decision to make at that time. I was telling my my 12th grade philosophy of prayer class, the girls, we were discussing Kiddush Hashem, and we were talking a lot about performing Kiddush Hashem. In a month from now, we're going to be on winter vacation, and we're going to have a lot of opportunities for interactions. And what does it mean to perform a Kiddush Hashem? And I was saying that we should tell our stories about things that we did nice on winter vacation. Like when you're going through it, record it, think about it. And then when it happens, tell your story, right? Tell how you said hi to the person, or you helped someone else with their lounge chair or something like that. So one girl raised her hand and said, but like, aren't we supposed to do those things? Like, it's not such a big deal. Like, that's what we're supposed to do. And I said, you're right. It is what we're supposed to do. But in a world where people don't always do what they're supposed to do, in fact, I'd argue they frequently don't do what they're supposed to do, those things should be celebrated, right? When people do the right thing, in a world where unfortunately most people are in their own selves, they're just thinking about where they need to go. It should be celebrated. I was walking into school today, and there was a mother who was dropping off her child, and the child was on crutches. The child had, I don't know, something had happened to their leg or whatever. Seemed pretty recent, and the child was, crutching in. And I waited there for a couple of extra minutes just to keep the door open for him. Thank you, all right, no problem. And then I walked in, and I saw that he went his way to the middle school, and a boy was coming this way, and looked like the boy was in a bit of a hurry. Looked like he really had somewhere to go. And he opened the door, and he started to run ahead because he was really in a rush. And then he saw the boy with crutches, and he doubled back and made sure to hold the door open for him. And he walked through, right? Which was a beautiful thing. What? Right. So, yeah. So he doubled. Yeah. So he doubled back. Well, that's not the end of the story. So when he went going, and when he kept going, I stopped him and I said, I saw what you did. That was really nice. Hazak u'barach what you did. And he went, thank you, Rabbi. And he kept going on his way. And I thought to myself, I said, does he really need that pat on the back, so to speak? That's what you should do. We would all expect, we would all hope that our child would do that. But I think we all know, we've been there, that people don't always do that, right? They just don't. They just live in their own world, and they zoom through the doors, and they need to get somewhere, and they almost don't even see the kid on the crutches that is walking through, and they just run ahead. And would have anybody said anything? Probably not. But he took the time to go ahead and do it. I felt the responsibility to tell him that what I saw him do, was a really nice act, and people are watching, and they're learning from him. I think that. So at that time he was the ish, exactly, and I was the one giving him the little bit of the pat on the back. But it's okay to compliment people when they do something, even if you say to yourself, well, we shouldn't compliment people for doing what they're supposed to do. Yeah, to agree, we don't have to necessarily blow it up. He's not Gandhi, but okay, he did. It's a nice encouragement of good job. I saw what you did. That was really good. Positive reinforcement, right? Positive reinforcement, and making him also feel at that time that, hey, when I do something, it has an impact, and people are watching. There are people who are around, and so a meaningless encounter like that at the beginning of the day, all of a sudden could have taken on an entirely. I don't know where those kids went for the rest of the day. I have no idea. I'm hoping that maybe the kid on the crutches did something nice for somebody else because he paid it forward. The kid who did something nice himself feels good about it and kept that going for the rest of the day. Who knows what the ripple effects of that small act were during the course of the remainder of the day. But I know that it was meaningful. And I know that at that moment, there was nobody else who was the ish, and that person decided to go ahead and be the ish. So when you step up in small capacities or in bigger capacities to fill a role that Hashem has put before you, or that you could seek out and try to make a difference, that's being the ish. That's being this unidentified person who's not doing it for credit, not doing it for the popularity or the fanfare, but has the ability to change the course of history. Yeah.
It's an opportunity, and Hashem's giving you the opportunity. If you're not going to do it, maybe he'll give the opportunity to somebody else. So ish, because is it going to be your opportunity or someone else's? And it might be like Queen Esther, like how she, not you, then someone else would do it.
That's an excellent point by Marilyn. In other words, God is keeping, what you're suggesting is that it's kept in like a generic term of ish, because it could be anybody. Anybody could fill that role. And if one person doesn't, God will find another person too. But your history and that history, the way you're remembered and the way others are remembered, could be different based on what you did, right? Esther Hamalka is an excellent example, right? Mordechai tells her, if you don't step into the role that you were placed here for, someone else will do it, right? Mordechai doesn't have any doubt that the Jewish people will be saved one way or another. That he's confident about. But how Esther will be remembered, how he'll be remembered, what the trajectory of it is, and how it will come to be, has a lot of different possibilities. And by Esther stepping into that role, she changes the narrative for herself and for the Jewish people for all time. Who knows what it would have looked like had it not been Esther to go ahead and take the reins on that situation. It could have been a lot messier, could have been a lot different. Only Hashem can tell us that, right? He brings a nice little story that's brought here in the Gemara in Masechet Sotah about the Jewish people in Mitzrayim. It says that when, I'll read it to you, it says a Talmudic passage offers a scenario relating to when Paro was deciding to enslave the Jewish people and murder their male babies. Said Rabbi Chaya, son of Abba, in the name of Rabbi Simai, 3 were involved in that decision. Paro consulted with three people when he was deciding what to do with the Jewish people, making them slaves. What did he do? Who are the three people? Bil'am, Iyov, and Yitro. Bil'am, we know, is the evil prophet who tries to curse the Jewish people later. Iyov is a character later in the Tanakh who suffers tremendously and is the key person in the story of trying to figure out why bad things happen to good people. And Yitro was the father-in-law of Moshe. Now, really, these three people did not necessarily leave at the same time. The rabbis are kind of putting them together to teach us a very important lesson. What is it that they did? So Bil'am told Paro, enslave them and kill them, right? As a wicked person probably would. Iyov kept quiet. He didn't say anything. And Yitro defied Paro, told him, you can't do this. And when Paro wanted to kill him as a result, Yitro had to flee back to Midian. And the rabbis say each of the people got their fate based on how they treated that situation. Bil'am said to kill the Jewish people. He eventually got killed by the Jewish people. He got what he deserved, and his wickedness was repaid on his head. Iyov, who kept quiet, he was neutral. Well, there's no such thing as being neutral at that point, right? When somebody suggests to you a plan to enslave an entire people, and you keep quiet, well, what do they say? What do they say? Like, guilty by association. Silence is affirming it, right? They call it in Hebrew, it's shtika ke'oda'ah. Like when you're quiet, you've affirmed it, right? If you're not going to say anything, then you're part of the problem, right? You're agreeing to it. You're an accomplice, right? And so Iyov, although he didn't suggest any evil plan, understood what was going on. He kept his mouth shut. He didn't want to put himself into the place of criticism, right? Into the limelight. And suffering comes to him. Tremendous suffering comes to him as a result of that. You think Iyov is neutral, but there really is no such thing as being neutral at that moment. When there's a point where when there's a critical turning point of doing something bad to somebody and you watch it happen, but you're quiet on it, you don't step up into that ish role. So then you're just as guilty, right? We try to tell this to students all the time. If you see a kid getting bullied and you just leave it alone, well, you're part of the problem. And they don't like that. They don't like hearing that all the time, but it's the truth, right? Now, I understand why kids would not step up in a situation like that and say something. They don't want to become the target themselves. They just want to, kids want to survive, right? There's a lot of kids who just want to survive the day and survive this horrific experience that is school and their social friends. It can be horrible for a lot of people. It's really, really challenging. And it breaks your heart when you see a lot of young boys and girls who are just trying to get by. Really, they're just trying to get by. There's those kids who really thrive. There's the kids who get, unfortunately, targeted. And then there's a whole pool of kids in the middle who are just like, I just want to blend. Just want to move in out of this, right? I just want to get out of here unscathed, right? And so I understand that. It's really, really hard. It's not so simple to just throw on a kid, well, you should have said something. And it's hard to say that because it's really hard to say something at that point. But the hope is that we do train our youth, perhaps in a collective way, not just by themselves as one, but in a collective way to stand up to that type of behavior and say, look, that's not what we do here. That's not how we operate. But even if it has to be one person, it's a daring event. But we want that. We want people to step up into that role and be that ish. And when they're not, they're doing like Iyov and they sit by idly. Yitro in this situation, he stands up to Paro and he suffers the consequences. He has to run away, right? In the short term, he loses a lot as a result of what he said. But long term, he becomes the father-in-law of the greatest human being to ever live, Moshe Rabbeinu. He occupies a positive, sagely role in the Jewish people. And an entire parasha, the one where we receive the Torah, is called by his name. The Parashat Yitro is the parasha that the Jewish people become the nation of God by accepting the Torah. So Yitro becomes a legend in Jewish lore. And this is where it started. When he stood up to Paro and said something, even though it cost him in the short term, in the long term, he benefited. His life was changed forever. And the lives of his family, Moshe and Tzipporah and everybody else, was also changed forever. Yitro is that ish, he's that man who stood up when nobody else would. And that's why he attracts Moshe, because Moshe is also an ish. When the Egyptian is hitting the Jew, he steps in to help the situation. When two Jews are fighting, he steps in to help the situation. When the daughters of Yitro are being harassed by the shepherds at the well, he steps in to save the situation. Moshe is the paradigm of what it means to be an ish, what it means to be a person who is worthy to step into a role that you were placed there for, and to make sure that you do the right thing in that situation, and everything else will take care of itself. If a person is mindful of that concept, of thinking of themselves as important enough to be the angel of Hashem, and God orchestrating their life and placing them in situations where they now have the ability to respond and fill a role, sometimes small, sometimes big, and to change the course of whomever you're interacting with, as well as yourself. If you can be mindful of that, then you could take your place among the greatest people, the Yosefs, the Moshes, the Yitros of the Tanakh, and be in that type of company, because you will be fulfilling what Hillel said. In a place where there aren't worthy people who will stand up to do the right thing and to fill a role when nobody else will, then you be that person. You say to yourself, God has put me here in that spot. The reason why no one else is stepping up, I don't know. Maybe they don't think God has put them here, but I know that I have the ability to help. And so I'm going to take advantage of that situation. And that's what elevates us to the highest of levels. Those are the types of people that get remembered long-term. In the beginning, they're an ish, they may be unidentified, but later on, they're angels of God, and they change the trajectory of their lives and the lives around him for all time. Questions or comments or thoughts? Yes.
Like Rasha, with the three types of people, that's really what you just said, that whole, you know what I'm saying? Like you have an opportunity to be three different types of people. Rasha,
Yeah.
you know, that whole.
Yeah, everyone's born, when you're looking at the Seder and the different Banim, right? Everyone's born with their own characteristics, and they have their own. Hashem wants to actualize the potential of every person, and therefore Hashem, being the fact that He created us and loves us and knows who we are, is going to put us in the scenarios where we can actualize the potential that we have. And so, whatever your particular challenges are, but also your particular talents are, the resources that Hashem has given you, that's where God is going to guide a person to be able to fulfill, to bring that from just potential into a reality, right? And if you're a Tam, if you're a Hacham, if you're a She'eno Yodea L'Shah, wherever you are in life, whatever status you have, whatever level of education you are, you can be put by God in situations to be an extension of God. I think the mentality, the mindset is the most important thing. To think of ourselves, not in an arrogant way, but in a powerful way, in a meaningful way, to say all of us are agents of God. All of us, as members of Am Yisrael, individually and collectively, are agents of the Almighty, and we have the ability. God is setting us up, if we're willing to take that role upon ourselves and step into the light, however difficult it may be, we have the ability to act as the agent of God, to be the Malach Gavriel, the strong angel who's going to change the course of someone else's life or our lives or the lives of the entire Jewish people for many generations to come. It's available for all of us. None of us should think of ourselves as so small. Each of us has the capability to be an ish, has to be that worthy person. Other thoughts or comments? It's something, it can happen in the smallest of ways, and again, it can happen in the biggest of ways. I think we're all attuned. I think the smaller way is actually harder than the bigger way. I think we're all attuned to those situations when, we get to be a leader, right? When we're leading a company, or when we're on a community organization, or we're changing the school, when we have the power that's been given to us. I think where people struggle is when they say, what can I do? I'm not X, I'm not Y, I don't have Z, right? And so people think to themselves, how much of an impact can I really make on the life of an individual, on the life of the community, if I don't have insert whatever thing that you think? But I think what the story is teaching us is those are excuses. Those are ways for us to say, well, I'm not in a position to be an ish. There's only some people who are in a position to be an ish. And the answer is, if you're thinking like that, then you're right. You won't become an ish. You'll just become a footnote, if that, in the lives of other people. Whereas if a person says, look, some people are gifted certain things. I'm gifted other things, whatever those things might be. That's for a person to figure out. But I know that I'm worthy. I know that I am a person who has something to offer. And I know Hashem is going to put me in a situation where I can offer what it is that I can do. And maybe it might not be the thing that everyone typically will point to, but I know that it's important. And if I fulfill that, I'm just as good as anybody else who does all of those other things. And that's a harder thing to come to a realization about. I think that's a much bigger challenge, is to find that ishness in the smaller things that go on in life. Yeah.
Just in your, let's say, you're not a community leader, you're not changing the school or changing the world, or that you're just doing it inside your home.
Absolutely.
And you're just,
Absolutely.
you're being your best as a mom, as a wife, and you're giving it over to
100%.
your children.
100% you could be that in your own home. Well, that, if anything, I would actually backtrack for a minute. I would say that's your first role. That's where your ishness has to start. It has to start in the home. It has to build from there. So yes, of course, a person, unfortunately, how many parents are there that, sometimes just take a hands off, they're a little checked out. It's hard. There's a lot of stresses coming up and they don't step in, they just kind of, unfortunately, there's some parents who throw up that, Rabbi, what could I do? I lost my kid. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And they give up because parenting is really, really hard. It's really, really hard. It's not, and it never gets easier. You think, I don't know, as they get older, it gets easier, it gets harder. Okay. I'm still in the young phase. You have to coach me when I get there eventually, right? There's a lot. And then sometimes, there's no coaching. Then you become a grandparent and it's like, I'm glad I'm done with this. Now I could be the, huh? Right. But then there's a different perspective, isn't there? It's a different perspective. Also because you could be like, play with them for an hour and then like, here, I'll see you later, and then go home. Like that's great. That's the best part of being a grandparent. That's the best part of being a grandparent, right? But we know that the grandparents in our community are a lot more hands-on. Believe me, my parents have lost a lot more sleep in their later stages of life than they did in their earlier stages of life when they were trying to just give us dinner and send us to school. Now they're worried about how my kid's gonna make a living for my other, for my grandkids and stuff like that. So it never goes away. But yes, to answer Frida's question, being an ish first starts in those smaller areas. That's where you develop your quality of being an ish, and that's where it has to start. And not to mention the fact that it's your responsibility to create a whole next generation of anashim, of people who themselves. So even if you don't have the whatever it is that people talk about a lot of times, but if I create children who can do that as well, that's perhaps an even bigger blessing and a lot more difficult, a lot more challenging. So definitely don't belittle any role. Whatever your position is, be that ish in that moment, in that to whomever you're interacting with, small, big, related, not related, friend, child, parent, whatever it might be. If you're able to think about every meaningful interaction as a possibility to be an ish to somebody to change there, then every interaction you have becomes so much more meaningful. And you then start to think about, how should I act this way? How would God want me to act? How am I supposed to be the malach of Hashem? And then you can do things the right way. You can be so much more mindful in how you're going to do it. It makes a big difference. It's hard. It's definitely not easy. I will not tell you that I do it that way, but it's something to think about. Something as we go through the parashiyah, think about it. Yeah. Other questions, thoughts? Okay. Have a great day, everybody. Enjoy.